Hey, welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to be implementing a UI table. And this is basically what a UI table looks like. It has the ability for you to add some rows in there and some information in those rows. Now, this video is just going to go over a very basic understanding and implementation of the UITableView. There's some other things you want to consider when creating these tables, like performance and exactly how you want it to go ahead and look. But in this example, we're just going to go ahead and create something that looks very much like this. It's going to have an image or an icon, and then it's going to have a title. It's going to have a title for the table view, and then we're going to add it to the tab bar at the bottom. Now, we're not going to implement any interaction here, so if you select it, it's not going to do anything. Right now we're just going to focus on the view itself, so I'll go ahead and I'll jump into Redmine and we can get started with this. Now, before I do want to recommend that you do a web search, or you go through the iOS documentation and you just take a quick skim through the UITableView controller and the UITableView after this video, or if you want to, you could pause the video right now and take a look at it. But we'll be going through this documentation as we go along here, just to show you how I kind of came about things and make it a little bit easier for you to figure out things in the future for yourself. So right now we're going to jump into Redmine, and because I want to add that table on the bottom, or the choice for you to navigate to this table, I want to go ahead and jump into my main tab bar controller, and I'm just going to duplicate this row, and I'm going to name this table view controller, and I'll go ahead and I'll create this in my controllers. So table view controller .rb, and I'll create the class here, and it's going to inherit from UITableView controller. Okay, and if we just ran it right now, we should actually see a table. So I'll go ahead and I'll use rake, and I'll run that in the simulator, and it should show us just the basic table with no information in there. So if I click on this blank area right here, it'll actually take me there. All right, so great. So you see the table has already been created. There's nothing in there. Like I said, there's no title. There's no icon on the tab bar. We actually have to go ahead and add that in. So let me exit out of this and add that in. I'm going to go to our main view controller and just copy this init statement, and I'll paste that in here. Delete that comment. All right. And then what we'll do is we'll use the same icon that we created and placed into our resources area. So we'll use that same icon here. We'll change the tag to 5, and then we'll change the title to table. And then what we'll do is we'll create a load view, much like what we do in the main view controller. We'll do the same thing here, and we're going to give this a title of table. So let's go ahead and run that and just see what that looks like. Okay, cool. So we do have a table, and you notice that because we added in the self.title, it actually took away the table view itself. So what we'll do is I'll just create a table view, a new table view, and we'll do UITableView.new, and let's try firing this up again. So exit out and run our simulator again, and it should now show us a actual table view like it did before, and the title. Okay, great. So that's what we're looking for here. And what we'll do is jump into the documentation for the UITableView controller, and what we want to do is we want to start giving those rows some information. So actually, before we jump into creating those cells, let's create a model inside our app directory. So it'll be under models, and what we'll do is we'll name this titles.rb, and it's just gonna have some titles in there that we can add into our table for some data, and we'll give this a self dot, I guess, all the titles, oops, we need to create a method out of that. Okay, self.all, and we're gonna pass through an array, and I'll just put boss, teacher, and professor. Some random strings in there that we're just gonna place into our cells. So now that we got that created, let's jump into manipulating that table view. So we'll pass in a method for the table view, and this method, so if you go to the table views itself, so if you go getting the table, so you got to click on table view, and then you go to UITableView here. What we can do, and in order to set up those cells, we actually have to specify how many cells to work with. So we have to tell the table view how many cells to create for the data that we're going to be passing through. So to do that, what you need to do is you need to look for number of rows in section, and we'll take this Objective-C code here, and I'm just going to paste it right above it, comment that out, and then we can work with this here. So we have to tell this method here, we have to tell it what to work with at first. So table view is what we're going to be working with, and then we have to pass through that number of rows in section, and we'll just pass through section. Okay, and then what we'll do is, in order to get that number of rows, we'll have our application count the number of strings that are in this array. So we'll do titles.all.count. So it's going to count each and every one of them. And then now that we've created, or now that we've told the UITableView how many rows we need, we actually need to tell it how to fill those rows. So we have to give it a UITableView cell. So if you read through the documentation, if you skim through it, you'll actually see how I came about all of this. So this is, again, very basics, and you really only have to implement two methods here to get those showing. So we'll do define, and we're going to be working with that table view again. So it'll be table view. Then we have to pass it so if we go back to our UITableView, we have to pass through a cell for row path. So we have to go to the accessing cells and sections, and we're gonna give it this right here, cell for row. I'm gonna again paste that in there. We're gonna pass through our table view because that's what we're working with. Then the cell for row at index, and then we pass in the index path. Now this is information that's being passed through by the application. So we're going to be able to work with those, the information, the parameters that are passed through. And what we do now is we now need to create that row, or not the row, but the cell. So if we go to kind of UITableView cell, and we just copy this, I'm going to copy and paste that, and that'll create the cell itself. So it'll create that cell view. And then what we need to do is give it a title. So if you're in the UITableView documentation for that cell, you go to managing the predefined content, and you just click on text label. This will kind of show you what you need to do. So you need to add a text label in there, and this is going to return a label for that main that table cell that we're working with in this row. So what we'll do is we'll call the cell, give it a text label, and then if you click through this UI label right here, so if you're working with the declaration, you'll notice that you need to give it a text. You need to pass through a text attribute. So we're going to pass through that text attribute, and we're going to give it the attribute, or the information in this string right here, this array. So what we need to do is we need to get that index path of that array. So we'll do titles.all, and then just treat that like an array. And then we need to pass through .row to access the number for that index path row. Now that we've gotten that row, we need to make sure, so if you look through cell for a row at index path, so I'll go back to that, cell for row at index path, controller view, cell for row at index path. managing, right there, accessing cells. This needs to return, so it needs to return an object representing the cell. So the total, the overall cell. So we need to pass or return cell. So that'll be our last line in there. Now, if we go ahead and we exit and we run this, this should actually show the titles or the strings that we have within the titles. Okay. And we'll go to tables. Oh, great. So now it is definitely showing that. So that's what we want. Now what we want to do is we want to add an image or an icon to the left-hand side. Now what you can do is you can pass in. So if you go to table view cell and you look at image view, you can pass through the image view property. So we'll do cell.image_view. And then if you click through UI image view, you need to pass through the image attribute, so image, and then you can pass through the UI image name, and we're gonna get the name of that icon we had in the resources that we're using for the tab, and we're just gonna use that. So the name is right here. I'll go ahead and I'll copy that and I'll paste that in there, and then this should actually work. So we'll do rake again, and it should fire up that simulator, and it should have the icon on the left-hand side for us. Okay, great. That's working well. It's working just how we want it. Now, a few things I want to point out here is, one, we're creating a new table view cell for each cell. There are some performance recommendations within the documentation where it talks about dequeuing cells. That way you can reuse the cell. And that's supposed to help with performance and memory allocation. So I recommend reading up on that. This, again, is the basics of just creating and displaying those cells on your table view. Another thing to consider is, let's say that you wanted the images to be, or you wanted custom image per title. So what you would do is you could, let's say you had an array that you just wanted to pass through in your class. You could give it an array of arrays. So let's say that you wanted boss to have two things here, the title and the title of an image. So we're going to pass through that a string that represents the title of, or the name of, that image in the resource. And we're just basically going to use that same image for each one. But this shows you that you could set different images for each title very easily. So as you can see, we have an array of arrays. Okay, I just created them on their own line, or put them on their own line so that it'd be easier to read. So we'll save that, and instead of calling just this title here, what we'll do is we'll take all the titles and we'll pass through that index path with the row, right? And then we need to access the second string in that array. So in an array, that would stand for, the index for that would be 1, and the index for this one would be 0. Since arrays start at 0, then they go 1, 2, 3, 4. So 0 would actually be the first one. Now that we have that in there, we can go ahead and exit, and we should see the exact same thing on the screen. But this just shows you an example of being able to customize this even further. So we'll go to tables, and like I said, we have the exact same thing, and that's working out perfectly for us. Now, you could create as many as you wish here. So if I went ahead and I just duplicated this a couple times, we'll do it a bunch of times, and we'll exit. Okay, and rake. This is just going to show you that the scrolling that's created along with these tables works just so perfectly. So go to tables, and you can see all of those added in there. So that works great. Now, like I said, you should definitely read up into the UITableView documentation on things like dequeue, reusable cell, and passing through those identifiers and things like that. But thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it helps. This is, again, just the basics of a UITableView. Until the next video, you guys have an awesome one.